Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. And your email? This is episode 251, an audience mailbag, where I am going to dig into some places where you ask me questions. So anywhere from a Facebook comment thread, all the way to the email address, choralosophy@gmail.com. I've got quite a bit of ideas here from the form on the main page at choralosophy.com, which I encourage you to use if you've got questions or things that you want me to address on the show, or if you have guest suggestions, or you'd like to suggest yourself as a guest. Pitch me on that using that form at choralosophy.com. And I've got a variety of sources here from audience response, and I've collected it over the last year or so. And I was thinking that I'd like to do an episode maybe about once a year, maybe in the summer when things chill a little bit with production schedules, etc., and with my life. So that's what you're going to hear today. You're going to hear questions about teaching. You're going to hear questions about the show. You're going to hear just small points that people might have made or thought about while listening to shows, just to see what my reaction or thoughts might be. And then, of course, like always, I'm hoping that will stimulate your thoughts and more questions, because what is this show all about? It's about better conversation. It's about feeling like you are part of the conversation. If you're a teacher or a choral musician or a singer or an appreciator of the arts in some remote corner of the world somewhere, and this show is supposed to be, or can be for you, that connection to the conversation. So this episode is all about that ethos. So stick around and listen all the way to the end, and you're not going to want to miss any of these questions. These are a blast, especially the ones that are not very nice towards me. Those are always super, super fun. And, you know, I'm like a duck. It's going to roll off my feathers, but I also want to be transparent with the kind of questions and comments that I get. So this is going to be a wild ride. Stick around. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. We all love to travel with our students, but we definitely don't love planning a trip. I know I've been there as the point person for details, and it is a nightmare. Forms, payments, fundraising, it's a never-ending task that takes away from doing what we love. That's where Kaleidoscope Adventures comes in. They've been planning performance trips for more than 30 years and handle all the details from start to finish. And one of the best parts about Kaleidoscope, they have crowdfunding options for every traveler. Contact Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com to find out how they can take your travel beyond expectations. I'm not sure how much, if anything, out there has not gone up in price since 2020, but I know one thing that hasn't, and that is the membership to the Patreon and to the Substack to support this show. The people who are signed up over there as paid subscribers, as my thank you to them, they can get things like t-shirts from the choralosophy.com shop. They can also get access to my Google folder of teaching materials that I've talked about on the show for over the years. And of course, they just want to help make sure that this show can continue. And one of those benefits is a shout out on the show. The producers and inner circle from Patreon are Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, Jonah Clicksbull, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Up first is a question from a listener who sent an email into choralosophy.com, asked to be kept anonymous, who says, how can a high school choral director teach his or her students to be successful in sight reading, an example, music literacy, when they face one or more of the following factors? They enter our programs as ninth graders without a strong foundation in sight reading and literacy from their middle school programs. They enter our programs as ninth graders coming from middle schools where choral director attrition has been high and frequent for some, a different director each year. And the third factor, we high school directors try to catch them up, but are faced with barriers, like a limited amount of class time, emphasis by administration on state testing, on performance, scheduling conflicts with high-level academics, special programs, etc. So, of course, my response to this person was what I will share with you here, which is that actually all of the literacy content that I've created on this show is designed for that exact situation, because almost exactly that is my situation. And I've shared this quite a bit over the years, but the resource that I've created there is choralosophy.com/music literacy. All of the pedagogical ideas that I present there are presented with the argument that they are made for beginners. I think one of the interesting things that I've experienced by creating this show over the years with a lot of literacy content is that people make the assumption, and it's a wrong assumption, that my kids are so good at what we do because they arrive already knowing how to do a whole bunch of stuff that your kids don't know how to do, and therefore your kids can't do the things that my kids can do. And that's just incorrect. In fact, everything on that list is true of my kids, with the exception of high turnover rate of the middle school teachers. We don't have turnover rate in my district at the middle schools. So we've got long-term people that have been there. However, I've told this before on the show too, our middle schoolers get vocal music 1.25 years spread out over 3 years from 6th through 8th grade. They come to 9th grade, they are beginners. If they're not getting their music education somewhere else, like band, orchestra, or piano lessons, they are beginners, which refers to a vast majority of my students. And of course, my school is no different than yours in that it has those administrative barriers where I would be run out of town if I stopped doing concerts and we were just to focus on musical fundamentals. And so I don't advocate doing that. I do think that we don't want to shut down our concerts because the music fundamentals aren't there. We want to figure out a way to build as much music fundamentals as we can while balancing that with a performance-based curriculum. And that is all of the content at Music Literacy subpage on my website. So I would encourage anyone who feels like their approach to literacy needs to be revamped to give it another listen. Go back and listen to that content that I've created, because I've done a lot of work to create that, and see if you can re-listen to it with the idea in mind that this is actually not for Chris's fancy kids in Kansas City who just showed up in 9th grade already able to read, because that is not the case. We start almost from scratch with almost every kid in terms of their ability to do what we do in the way that we do it. And I think that the process is very science-based, and I feel like I've kind of proven to a lot of people that it works. And we've got audience members all over the world who are trying some or all of the approaches that they're learning here. So I would encourage you to do that. Okay, next audience question. This is from Emily over on the form at choralosophy.com. She says, "Hi, I was wondering whether you would be interested in doing an episode about aging voices and choirs made up of elderly people, the challenges this represents and how to handle them. I'm not an expert, but recently became a deputy music director for a male voice choir with quite a high average age, and I'm struggling with the usual techniques." Now, this is a really good question, Emily. I should do an episode on the aging voice. It's been on my list of things to think about for a while. Of course, I'm there with you. I work with a church choir whose average age is, I'm not going to say, but up there, right? Probably in the 70s. I don't know. I haven't done the math. But that is a common challenge for a lot of us, especially those of us who work in church and community groups. And there are serious issues related to range, fatigue, just a variety of concepts that you have to think about when you're choosing the repertoire. And so I'm not an expert either. And so that on this topic, I feel like I've got practical hands-on expertise from doing it for so long and figuring out, how to check the soprano part for my church choir to make sure that it's not going to kill them. Those types of things. But as far as resources for them, I think that would be a great idea for an episode. So if anyone has any experts to recommend to me in that area that I should interview and talk about that would be awesome. Another one from the forum at choralosophy.com is from Jura Litchfield. "I teach music to everyone in an elementary school with 40 minutes a week with each group. While I applaud all of your success with unaccompanied singing, I wonder if there is a guest who could outline what the essentials are for teachers like me who see their students only a fraction of the time than you do. I am focusing on rhythmic cohesion, singing in tune, beginning rounds, and silencing the students' inner critics. Audiation is definitely a goal. Please provide some guidelines for teachers in my situation." So there was an episode with Kai Billings that is directly related to this topic and trying to bridge the gap between my secondary approach But I would again echo here that the stuff that I talk about with literacy instruction and pedagogy really does apply to all age levels, but with a strong caveat that it does take time to develop those skills. And it's one of the most frustrating things for me, I think, because in our American music education system, we are not given the time to help all kids get really good at music. That's just a reality. I was talking about this the other night with some friends and just kind of griping about it in general because it creates negative incentives for elementary school music educators who aren't, it's not through no fault of their own. It's that system creates an environment where we are incentivized to find the talented musical kids and then nurture them, because we don't have time to build up a kid from zero in those elementary school situations, like Jura points out, where they have 40 minutes a week total with each group of kids. And you can introduce concepts in 40 minutes a week, but you can't get good at skills. And those are totally different things. It takes daily repetition to form the synapses in the brain that wire us for music. And not all kids have that coming from other parts of their lives. And if they're going to have that fundamental training, it's going to be in elementary school. So, of course, Jura's question is not to ask, how am I going to solve the systemic problem there of the time? But I would just say, if nothing else, elementary school teachers should, in my opinion, take some pressure off themselves and figure out what they can do in the amount of time that they have that builds a foundation for the next step. And so I think in a lot of ways, what that looks like is exactly what Jura just said, which is that we have to build some type of a musical wiring in their brain. And he's right to say that it should start with rhythm. It should start with a steady beat. And that is, there's research that shows that that would also help in their other areas of school. Reading comprehension, for example, reading, like spoken word fluency is related to the ability to keep a beat, etc. And then, of course, hearing tunes in their head and learning to audiate simple patterns. And I do think that even in 40 minutes a week, concepts of reading and music literacy can be introduced, but not probably to fluency. That's really just more of like you're introducing concepts and having them play with the concepts, having them actually experience doing music with those written notes, even if it's like Carol Krieger would say, like the symbols and the notation, et cetera, might not be the traditional stick notation, but you're figuring out some way to get them to see and respond and then listen and respond. All those things are really, really important. But I think this is another topic that is brought up several times, and I get this type of a question a lot, where I am always open to being clued into more experts in the elementary school realm that do a really good job of building the continuity into future music making and future ensemble musician concepts, because the reality is not every elementary school music educator shares that philosophy. There are competing philosophies of elementary school music education. Are we essentially teaching young kids music appreciation in elementary school by exposing them to concepts of music, or are we trying to build the building blocks of a musical brain in all kids? And those are two different approaches. And so, of course, I'm more sympathetic to the brain building, but I recognize that there's not really enough time for that. So this is an ongoing conversation that I think we need to be having. Another one from the forum over on the website is from Graham Sutton. It's a pretty simple one. It just says, getting the best tuning from a cappella choirs. Well, this is a simple question with a simple answer. Teach them to audiate. Teach them to hear the music in their head louder than they are singing. That's huge. So if the foundation of their literacy training and the way they learn their repertoire is not based around practiced intentional audiation, then tuning is always going to be a battle, because they have to hear, ultimately, they have to hear when they are out of tune. And that means that they've got some kind of internal track playing. And then usually in that situation, we then know that the intonation issue is probably vocal technical, which is related very closely and discussed a lot in detail with the James Jordan episode, the most recent GIA series episode with James Jordan, where he does a lot of talking and teaching about that. And probably there will be more to come on that. But so it's a two-pronged approach: audiation and vocal technique. I actually would not teach a choir to sing in tune specifically. I would teach them to audiate, so they hear in tune in their head. Hear, that's a hear in air quotes, of course. You're thinking the language of the music. And then the vocal technique that allows them to reproduce the pitch that they hear in their head. Okay, here's one from Jennifer Graybill. I've been teaching choir for a little over 10 years, mostly middle school. I've recently started thinking about the specific struggles young singers have. My family relocated and I moved from a very music supported community, large school corporation, to a very rural, not supporting music as art community. My singers are very different, and I started wondering, my young singers tend to either be tonally challenged or breath challenged. Is that true? Are singers generally one or the other? What are the best ways to work on breath, since that's most of my students? But then also attack the tone issues, less but generally the louder students. Maybe you would have already spoken about this and can direct me to a previous podcast, etc. So these are some common, I'm going to call them misconceptions, and I don't mean to attack Jennifer. Thank you for your question. This is a really good question. But I think there are some misconceptions that should be addressed here. So is it true that most singers are tonally challenged or breath challenged? No, I don't think that either of those things are true. I think that most young singers have not been taught audiation. So there's that one again. They have not been taught the intentional buildable skill, by the way, of hearing music in one's own head. And we've got all this mythology, and I do think it comes back to the elementary schools don't have enough time. And so that not enough time leads to the cultivation of the already talented musical brain to the detriment of all the other kids. And that creates these myths that some kids just have it and some kids don't have it. Well, of course, because we're not teaching it. So, but then the mythology then becomes, after generations of this, is that not all kids can be taught these things. And that just isn't true. I've seen incredible work done with, in fact, I'll shout out my recent colleague, Dr. Lauren Tosh, at Lee Summit High School, who's been doing wonderful things, amazing things with our life skills music class, where they are, even severely disabled students, are reading music by the end of the school year. They are hearing pitches in their head. They are reproducing them, not all the time as accurate as maybe kids that are neurotypical or whatever, but the most limited kids that most people would say they could never do that. Yes, they can, because they are buildable skills, and they are buildable skills to some degree in all kids. So they're not totally challenged. They just haven't been taught to do it yet. So I know that doesn't make it easier when you get into the classroom and you've got all these kids that can do it and then the ones that can't. And so then that's where the pedagogy and the philosophy of education and the science behind it comes into play, which is what we've been trying to do here, is provide resources for this kind of thing on this show. And then to the other part of Jennifer's question, are some kids just breath challenged? No, I don't think so, unless there is some kind of physiological damage of some kind, where their lungs are damaged, the vocal folds are damaged, they won't come together all the way, but that's kind of the obvious. Typically, kids sing with a breathy sound for one of two reasons, or combination, I guess, is one, very simply, their vocal folds aren't touching all the way when they sing. That's going to make a breathy sound. Lots of reasons why that might happen, of course. Very common one, though, this is going to be the audiation episode unofficially, but it's because they are shooting for a pitch that they are guessing about. And so oftentimes that hesitation turns into lack of fold proximation. Now, of course, one of the other reasons is that they are in puberty, maybe, or their voice is not fully developed and there are body parts down there that you can't see that are not functioning the way that they will eventually, and we sometimes just have to be patient. So, of course, the expertise of the educator is to try to diagnose which of those situations it is. Is it breathy because they're hesitant, or is it breathy because they're in puberty? Of course, I'm vastly oversimplifying. Another episode to shout out here for more on this topic of breathy young, especially female singers, is the episode with Bridget Sweet. So you can look up that one, Choralosophy, and then search Bridget Sweet as well. If you haven't already, I really think it's time for you to ditch the bulky sight reading books, the paper, all of the things that are already in the kids' folders in your classroom, because it's not customizable to what they need in the moment. Sight Reading Factory allows this and so much more. And then the work we do in the classroom can be customized to what they need in the music and the repertoire they're learning, and it can be customized to their current learning level as a group. So use the Choralosophy checkout code, Choralosophy. When you check out, it'll give you a 10% discount every time you get a membership for yourself and for all of your students, which is really, really important so they can do this at home. All right, here's one from John Gidry. How do you teach students to mark the score during rehearsal? It is part of my assessment. He's heard my grading episodes, like episode 21 and episode 121. So I am wondering if you teach them a specific system of score marking. So what I do is I require them to come up with a system of score marking. And that's part of their grade. They're being graded on how frequently during rehearsal they are using that score marking system, without being reminded by the teacher. Like it's a self-starting kind of a thing. I don't, though, prescribe certain markings they have to use, but especially in the beginning level classes, I am giving suggestions at the yin-yang. So I'm always showing, going to the board and writing stuff. Here's a thing you could write. If you can think of a different thing to write here, then that's fine too, as long as it tells you the same message. So of course I guide them in a system that makes sense to me, but then encourage them to come up with a system that works for them, as long as they are taking the stuff the conductor or the teacher is communicating, or the stuff that their section leader is communicating, and figuring out a way to make it make sense on their sheet music, or they're figuring out ways to make their score more readable for their brain, especially those kids that are dyslexic or other types of things. You got your highlighters, you got your pencils, all those things that are making it work for you. That's my expectation, is that kids are turning their sheet music into a canvas of art that makes them sing their part better. And however they do that is fine. So here's one from Ego Rodriguez. And it simply says in the form over at the website, it just says Latin pronunciation. Please address Latin pronunciation. So this is another simple question. So I'm going to give a simple, short answer here. There is no correct Latin pronunciation. There is no one correct Latin pronunciation. However, there are incorrect Latin pronunciations. So if your first thought is, well, that doesn't make sense. What I mean by that is that Latin this is going to be, I don't want to do a whole episode on this. I don't know if anyone is as nerdy as me on this topic and wouldn't want to listen to it. I think you would all shut it down real quick. So I'll just keep it short. So here's how we can think of Latin pronunciation. Latin for almost a millennia was used as a written language only. It was the educated person's language of Europe. And it was a Rosetta Stone of sorts, where an educated person in a Germanic-speaking part of Europe could write a letter to a person in an Italian-speaking part of Europe, knowing that the educated person would have been taught to read and write Latin. The way you pronounced it was not important to them at the time. That wasn't the point of preserving the Latin language through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, etc. in Europe. It became the language of the educated, which is why we still think of it as the language of medicine, for example, or the language of the church. That's where essentially the people who were getting educated at the time. So the point of it was not to speak in conversation. That died with the Roman Empire, essentially, the idea that we're speaking Latin. And so it is a recent invention, mostly by choir directors who don't know the full history, that there is this correct way that you pronounce Latin. And we learned it in our undergrads, and we didn't learn the rest of the history a lot of times. And so there are many correct ways to pronounce Latin, but you have to kind of align that pronunciation with the spoken language of the origin. So there are different ways that a French-speaking person in the 1700s would have pronounced Latin, and there are rules that align with that. And then there are ways that a Germanic-speaking person would have spoken Latin at that time, and there are rules that go with that. So the only thing I would say is incorrect is mixing and matching your systems in an unthinking way, that you're pronouncing Latin with mixtures of British person Latin and French person Latin and Germanic person Latin, and then an American person with no vowels purity at all, and you're mixing it all together into a hodgepodge, then I would say that it's incorrect. But if you're sticking to a system and you've done your research, it could be called correct. Okay, so that wraps up the part of my mailbag that is from the website and from emails in this case. The next one is from, I guess this is also from an email. This one is lots of fun. This is, I think, kind of funny, but also sad, this is an email I get. I've gotten several emails from this person who is simply known as the anonymous choral professor in my emails. It's a dummy email address with no name given. And so I'm just going to read you some thoughts that this person has about the Choralosophy Podcast. So here's number one. During your earliest initial podcast episodes, you claimed that you started the podcast just to have conversations and learn. But yesterday, your wife, in a comment, stated that your initial reason was money, because you lost your church position, likely due to the pandemic, which I can relate. From day one, dozens of my colleagues and myself stated that your podcast was created for money, not a positive change for our choral profession. But then some of your podcast episodes, count 5 as of today, were positive and a great contribution to our profession. So let's unpack that. Okay, so I feel like for the people who have listened to this show for a long time, that I have been radically open and transparent. In fact, I've done episodes about the origin of this show and where it comes from. I did create this show to have conversations and learn, because I have a genuine and deep-seated belief in the power of conversation, especially conversation when there is conflict and when there is division and when there is disagreement. That is a true and real belief. I also created the show as a job to earn income. And I fully recognize that a person could look at that and say that this is not a positive development. Now, I think that that is bizarre, to be honest. I think it is bizarre to have a person be upset or be offended that I am making money by doing this show. Do y'all have any idea how much work it takes to do this show? If you're going to begrudge the fact that I have income coming from this show and say that that's a negative thing, I wonder if a person would stop and think about what that implies. That implies that I should do all of this work for the audience for free, neglecting my wife, neglecting my children, neglecting the bills of my household, and I should keep doing that work without getting paid. That seems like not a very good idea. Now, I have no issue with a person who wants to create a podcast for free and not seek any kind of money for that. There are people who do that. You will notice, though, that those shows don't last very long, typically. So I did create this show from the very beginning with the hopes that I could turn it into a business. And I have. And it's been very successful, and I'm very, very proud of it. I have zero apologies to give and zero to hide about whether or not this show is a job for me. Yes, it is. And I'm okay with that. And if you're a part of this audience, you should be okay with that too, because I don't charge you for it. I ask for voluntary subscriptions through the Patreon, through the Substack. But beyond that, I am creating free content. And what you have to deal with is about 3 total minutes over the course of a 1-hour episode of advertisements. And that's how we pay the bills around here. That's how we make it work. Another from this same anonymous professor who says, his complaint number 2, or her, I don't even know anything about this person. A large majority of your podcast episodes are clickbait and purposefully filled with divisiveness, controversy, and if you're not doing this as a teacher, then your students aren't learning kind of mentality. And literally every choral colleague I know has said this about your podcast. Okay, so what's interesting, because I do know from other comments, which you'll hear in just a little bit, that this person doesn't listen all the time, or at least would like me to think that they don't listen all the time. This person could be listening to this right now, and I would have no idea. But of course, it reveals another just kind of basic business illiteracy of internet-based, content-based businesses. Yes, people have to click, or else I don't pay my bills. That is true. That is not the same thing as I am creating content and the episodes that are clickbait. In fact, that is not how the business model works at all. I create episodes that I think are going to be of value to you, the listener, and interesting for me. It has to be both. Because if I'm bored in the conversation, think about it the way, if you're a choir teacher, the way it would work with repertoire in your classroom. If you're not passionate about the repertoire you're presenting, the kids probably won't be either. And so for me, my formula is to create episodes that I think you will find valuable, but I have to guess because I don't know who all of you are that are out there listening. But I also have to find it interesting myself, because then it will be I've got a better shot of creating an episode that is of value. And I would say the audience, the evidence is that the audience thinks there's more than 5 of my 275 or so at this point, various episodes. I didn't even give them all numbers, right? This is episode 251, but not all my episodes even have numbers attached to them. So it's like maybe 280 or so episodes. I think there are more than 5 that somebody somewhere found valuable, or else I wouldn't still be able to do this. And so that's an important point, and that are a positive contribution to somebody somewhere. And of course, I reject the idea that a person who is a choral professor of anything gets to decide which and episodes that I've made or anyone else has made that are of value. That is the decision of the audience, of the wider internet. And of course, this show draws listeners from all over the world, 30, 40 different countries regularly, all the time. And so there is a bigger conversation about the way music exists in our world than whether or not a particular person in the audience likes or dislikes any one individual episode. I think people could appreciate or should appreciate that I can't operate a show like that. I can't do a popularity contest. It's not going to work. And so this person goes on to say, based on the above two reasons, many colleagues have likened your podcast to Fox News or other right-wing entertainment instead of education-based podcasts and the like. Other colleagues have stated that you are trying too hard to be the cool teacher or to be liked. I read that one to my students and they thought that was hilarious because they do not think I'm cool. I am super cringe. I am sorry that so many people think these things. I don't think this is fully a fair comparison to your podcast, but your podcast does promote a lot of divisiveness and comes across as entertaining. Yes, I listen to an episode here and there, and there's the admission, right? I listen to an episode here and there, but this person also finds themselves qualified to comment on the broader spectrum of my work. But most of your episodes are not filled with educational transferable pedagogy, but instead it is your ranting about this or that. Well, I guess this episode contains some ranting about this and that, and maybe occasionally I will make a humorous comment that people find entertaining. Collective gasp, everyone. So the person goes on, do I hope that you and your podcast get canceled, as I have heard from 100 colleagues saying so? No, I do not. I do believe that fair is fair, and you are producing a podcast to try to create conversations and positive change in our profession, but unfortunately, the content is driven by a clickbait agenda. So I'll wrap up this audience mailbag portion with the response to this person, but other people who might feel that way about the show is that I know, because I've had this conversation with many people, that this show is seen as controversial by people who meet this description very specifically. They listen here and there, and they mostly see the stuff on social media that is designed to get people to click, because that is, that is the only way that an audience of the size of this show can be cultivated and maintained, is because people continue to click. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that is the reality that I have to deal with as a content creator. Stopping the flow of traffic to the show means the show stops existing. It is as simple as that. Because no, I'm not going to just shout into the void here and do a show for free, because I do have a family to support. This is not a thing I would be willing to do every week or even every other week. If it wasn't a job, I would need to go get a different job. I mean, y'all know this. Like I'm a public school teacher, like many of you are, and I've got, bills to pay and inflation and all of the things. Like I deal with all the same stuff that you do, right? And so I think this is a really interesting bit of response and I shared all of this with you, all of this audience response today, to give you a sense of the type of feedback that I get. So I typically get, the vast majority of feedback I get is positive related to the show. It's thank yous. Please keep doing this. We're behind you. Maybe not publicly because it's controversial, but we're behind you. Keep doing it. Great job. You're a valuable part of our profession and you're offering all this stuff. But then, of course, there is this other contingent of this person and their friends and their 100 colleagues or whatever that they're referencing that see this show as very not beneficial to the choral landscape. And of course, I will let you, as the audience to the show, the ones who actually do listen, be the judge. However, I'm creating this episode also to continue to remind people that I do want to hear what you think. So that is very important to the ethos of the show. It's the better conversation ethos. So on the way out of this segment, I will remind you the ways to do that. So you might appear on a future Choralosophy mailbag episode if you go to choralosophy@gmail.com, which is the show email, and just leave your questions and comments there. You can also go to choralosophy.com, and on the main page there is a Google form embedded right there on the main page. You have to scroll down a couple things, but you'll find it, that allows you to either apply to be a guest on the show, where you will discover that I will treat you fairly. I will ask you questions out of genuine curiosity. If I don't agree with you, you'll hear that too. But you're going to hear it in a non-argumentative way and really just a I see it differently kind of way. And it's going to lead to something productive. And I'm also going to try to present you as in the most fair, positive light that I possibly can. Of course, then there's other ways, which is over on the Choralosopher's Facebook page. You can ask questions. You can comment things about the episodes. You can start your own question threads there that might turn into an episode in the future. Because I'm really genuinely trying to create an ecosystem within our choral field where we can open the Overton window about what we can talk about related to our profession rather than closing in on a narrow set of acceptable opinions. I think we lose. We lose when that becomes the case. And that is the main reason that when I lost my church job in 2019, not related to the pandemic, by the way, this was pre-pandemic. So this person likes to make a lot of assumptions about me. But I lost that church job before the pandemic because the church simply ran out of money. And I chose this as the way I wanted to replace my church income. This show was going to be my effort to do that because my genuine belief in the power of conversation, ideas, philosophy. Being a better music educator comes from having a better philosophy informed by more science, informed by more great traditions of thinking, informed by people from outside of the choral profession, which you will notice is a big important part of the focus of this show. In fact, coming up next week, you're going to hear from a literacy specialist who is not a music person, just a literacy advocate and activist, not a music one. So we can compare notes on music literacy versus regular literacy. And I think those topics are very important. And one of the other things I'll throw in there from this anonymous professor, he said that there is a perception among many of the colleagues that this person talks to that my show is only about three things: literacy, DE, and myself. Now, of course, I'll leave that up to you to go through the entire feed of 280 something episodes and actually consume the content and then tell me that those are the only three topics. Now, because of social media, are those the topics that get the most clicks and attention? Probably. Yeah, probably. But that is not what the show is about. The show is about something different almost every week. Now, literacy, vocal pedagogy are two big ones, and those episodes are all collected because those are really important topics to me and to audience members who ask questions about those things. You can go to choralosophy.com/music literacy to get all the reading related episodes, and you'll see right there how many of those there are. And then you can also go to choralosophy.com/vocalped, all one word, and you can see vocal pedagogy related episodes. Yes, there is also a playlist on my YouTube channel of DEI related conversations because, shockingly, I actually think that topic's very important. And so I talk about it a lot, and I stand by that as well. So if I want to know what you think, so tune in, listen, ask questions, join the conversation, and let's keep this going for another 6 years. Why? Who says we got to stop doing this? And in order to do that, like I said before, when you use the promo codes at the advertisers who I shamefully earn income from, then that helps me a lot because then I'm able to get a kickback from every time you use those codes. And it helps you, a more shameful win-win stuff going on here, where you get a discount for your program, but I also get a piece of that so that I can keep the lights on here. And then, of course, people who decide that they do buy in and believe the mission of this show, and they're going to support that by going to patreon.com/choralosophy or choralosophy.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber or a free subscriber at either of those websites. And of course, there's value and benefit to any of those, any and all of those things. So thanks for tuning in to this episode. And we're going to be back with an exciting episode next week with like I said, I'll just do a little teaser here of the next episode with an awesome activist for literacy and education and why that is so important from a non-musical perspective. And there's some fireworks in that episode, which I just was in love with, and I think you will be too. So stick around and keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.